and a third of the world's helium comes from Oman. Iran attacked Oman, destroying their infrastructure and taking that helium offline for at least 3 to 5 years is the estimate. Strait of Hormuz disruption threatens helium supply and semiconductor production. What most people don't know, and I didn't know until I started investigating all of this, you cannot make a microchip, especially the advanced chips that are required for AI, without helium. It is absolutely necessary. If a third of the world's helium goes away, a third of the world's microchips go away.
What if the next economic crisis doesn't begin on Wall Street? What if it starts with something most Americans have never even thought about? Helium. Mike Maloney is warning that a major geopolitical disruption could hit energy, food, financial markets, and even the supply chain behind America's AI boom. He believes we're looking at a combination of massive market bubbles, energy shortages, fertilizer disruptions, and a critical shortage of helium used in advanced semiconductor manufacturing. And his final warning is even more alarming. This is the chain reaction he says America needs to prepare for.
And this is the very first time in history where we have simultaneous super hyperbubbles in both real estate and stocks. This is extremely dangerous because all bubbles burst. Always. There is no other way about it. When you go into a super hyperbubble, this is usually because of some sort of manipulation, usually caused by the Federal Reserve, but we've got those bubbles, and simultaneously, this is 3 times leveraged ETFs. So if this is a S&P 3 times leveraged, and the S&P goes up 10%, your investment goes up 30%, but it cuts both ways. And when a bubble pops, the people that are invested in this kind of stuff get completely wiped out. And here we are at the biggest concentration in history of these super leveraged stock market products. And then this is really interesting. It is margin debt in brokerage accounts compared to the size of the currency supply, how much currency exists. So this is the M2 currency supply, and we are at the biggest bubble in history as far as people borrowing money to borrowing currency to invest in stocks. Very, very dangerous. Again, leverage cuts both directions, and actually the way the math works, it cuts even sharper on the way down than it does on the way up. You end up with more leverage on the way down. Now, what happened when the tech bubble popped? How much did the NASDAQ lose? And it was about 85%.
Maloney's first warning is about the financial system itself. His argument is that the market isn't simply expensive. It's unusually concentrated and increasingly exposed to leverage. He points to previous bubbles and the enormous losses that followed when they broke. But that raises the next question. What could actually trigger a much larger crisis this time?
When I first presented this, this is the total barrel, it's millions of barrels of oil per day making it through the Strait of Hormuz. And it had just shut off like a light switch. And then I updated it further. This is the total number of ships, and it's going out through March. Now, the World Trade Organization has Strait of Hormuz tracker on their website. So this is the latest information, and it's unbiased information. If you're getting information, they sort of fudge things. I've stopped using any U.S. media. It all has spin in it. I mean, how many times have we won this war? How many times has the Strait been opened? And our news media, you just can't trust anymore. So this is directly from the World Trade Organization's website. The gray line here is the 7-day moving average of last year, 2025. And they used all of 25 as an index. So they indexed the amount of oil making it, or ships making it through the Strait of Hormuz for 2025, and then the gold line is this year, and you can see it just shut off. So this goes from January of 25, January of 26, there's March, and it turned off like a light switch. This is the first memorandum of understanding where they allowed a few ships through, but now there's basically no traffic. This is 20% of the world's energy output. This is the amount of liquefied natural gas making it through. Now, liquefied natural gas has to be kept very cold. It's in these cryogenic chambers, and you can see that when it gets hot in the summer, the amount coming through the strait goes down because it's boiling off rapidly. But again, only a few ships making it through here. This, you will see, is incredibly important later. There are things that are part of the supply chain of the entire world, everything that we use, that are derived from these. You'll see all of that later. Now, these are some quotes. What we are currently witnessing today is the fastest onshore oil inventory decline in history. And that's from HFI Research. They specialize in oil research. And then commercial inventories of crude oil, gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, they've all run down. We've modeled it. We're approaching unheard of inventory levels. I mean really, really low levels. Then you'll see price shoot up to $150, $160 a barrel.
Now the story moves from Wall Street to the real economy. Energy isn't just another commodity. It's an input into transportation, manufacturing, logistics, and agriculture. Maloney's warning is that a prolonged disruption could push prices dramatically higher. And Americans have seen what energy shocks can look like before. He takes the story back to the 1970s.
I lived through this in the 70s. I remember it. I had sort of a special exemption because I was a traveling salesman with commercial plates. But for the first time in U.S. histories, states did not get to set the speed limits. There was a national speed limit of 55 miles an hour. Gas rationing set for Monday. Now, gas rationing, this is one of the problems when government intervenes on anything. They're going, oh, poor people still need to be able to get to work, so we're going to have to ration gas instead of letting supply and demand be set into equilibrium by price. That's what price discovery does. And if they had let it go up enough, these gas lines would not have developed. But instead, they decided to ration it out. If you had an even-numbered license plate, if it ended in an even number, you could only fill up on even-numbered calendar days. Odd, the same. So, if your mother died and you had a funeral to go to in San Francisco on the wrong day, you ran out of gas halfway and you got stuck. This was a huge hardship on everybody. Another thing that they did is they would only allow so much per car. Now, what happens when you can't fill your tank up each week? If you get a quarter tank, you got to go to the gas station 4 more times that week. And the result of all of the government intervention was all of these gas lines developing everywhere. I remember sitting in I could fill up any day, but I remember sitting in gas lines for 45 minutes to get into a gas station. It was a total nightmare. And the result of all of this, and by the way, so pumps would run out of gas, and you need sulfur to make sulfuric acid, which you need to be able to make fertilizers that are phosphor-based fertilizers. So this is a third of the world's urea, the fertilizers, the nitrogen fertilizers. The phosphor fertilizers have also, I think it's greater than 30%, but those are gone as well because of the lack of this byproduct of refining oil, this lack of sulfur. And sulfur goes into everything. You can't heap leach all of the metals, the ore that you dig up for copper and things like that if you don't have sulfuric acid. So this is what happened to urea-based fertilizers, but this data ends in June. It's going back up, and it's going to get worse. This is the U.S. is to harvest the fewest acres of wheat in 149 years. So not only do we have a lack of fertilizer in the world, giving you a lower crop yield per acre, but we're also harvesting the least amount of acres in the United States. Ukraine farmers despair as Russian Black Sea blockade traps their harvest. Food threat. Russian attacks on grain ships raise fears of global supply crisis. Ukrainian attacks damage Russian grain ports. Russia-Ukraine strikes threaten global food supply. So there's less food coming from the United States, there's less fertilizer for the entire world, and then they're trying to damage each other's economies right now by stopping grain exports and grain production. Now, what is going to happen here? Most likely is, first of all, food prices are going to go way up in the advanced countries as we pay more for fertilizers, but we're going to be bidding them away from the poorer countries. And so there's going to be a fertilizer shortage, or even no fertilizer available. And I actually believe this is a third of the world's fertilizer. I think you're going to see famine return to Africa, Southeast Asia, and other places as crops fail in those places where the rich countries have bought all of the fertilizer that the world produces, and they've got to go without fertilizer. And so that's coming back.
This is where the warning gets much bigger. The argument isn't simply that gasoline becomes more expensive. Energy disruption can move through the supply chain into fertilizer, farming, and ultimately food prices. Maloney predicts severe consequences for poorer countries if wealthy nations outbid them for limited fertilizer supplies. That famine prediction is his warning, not an established outcome, but it dramatically raises the stakes. And then comes the most unexpected connection of the entire interview, i.e.,
and a third of the world's helium comes from Oman. Iran attacked Oman, destroying their infrastructure and taking that helium offline for at least 3 to 5 years is the estimate. Strait of Hormuz disruption threatens helium supply and semiconductor production. What most people don't know, and I didn't know until I started investigating all of this, you cannot make a microchip, especially the advanced chips that are required for AI, without helium. It is absolutely necessary. If a third of the world's helium goes away, a third of the world's microchips go away. So this is what it looks like in Oman. And the U.S.-Iran war has cut into world helium production by roughly 33%. Iran drone missile strikes on Qatar facilities have caused extensive damage, a halt to production, and a declaration of force majeure, meaning all the contracts that Oman had to deliver 1/3 of the world's helium, they just said, sorry, we can't. There isn't any more. And then repair of production facilities and recovery of the lost Qatari share is estimated to take 3 to 5 years. So we're talking 2029 to 2031 before we get back to the levels that we were at in January of this year.
This is the interview's biggest reveal. The story has now gone from stocks to oil, from oil to food, and from food to the technology sector, driving much of America's market valuation. Maloney's thesis is essentially a chain reaction. Energy shortages can damage industrial supply chains. Supply chain disruptions can hit critical materials, and those materials are needed by the technology companies investors are betting on. Whether every prediction materializes is uncertain, but the connection he is drawing is clear. America's financial future is increasingly tied to physical resources.
The U.S. State Department has issued a worldwide caution over heightened Middle East tensions, warning Americans everywhere to exercise increased caution. It cites potential for escalation, flight cancellations, airspace closures, and threats to U.S. facilities and interests worldwide. And so, just like that video that I referred you to earlier, They are worried about attacks on our home soil. We have now groomed an entire generation of terrorists by killing off their family members and hurting their country and stuff. And so we are going to see something in the future, like we saw 9/11. There will be terrorism again in the United States. That's my prediction. Go to MikeMaloney.com, put in your email address. I will keep you informed. Now,
And that is where Maloney's entire argument ultimately leads. In his view, this isn't one isolated problem. It's a combination of financial excess, leverage, energy disruption, food insecurity, critical material shortages, and geopolitical escalation. Some of the most dramatic statements are predictions, not guarantees. But his central warning is straightforward. When financial markets depend on a fragile physical supply chain, a geopolitical shock can travel much further than investors expect. And if Maloney is right about even part of that chain, the consequences wouldn't stay on Wall Street. They would eventually reach everyday Americans.